What's your latest new thoughts on China?
I think my latest new thoughts on China is to see more and more evidence of China's self-confidence in the world. You read books about it and you read articles about it, but if you know as many Chinese people as I do, 比较多，不就是在网络直接的，接触。他们对那个全世界的自信 self-confidence 越来越大。And I see this in people's individual behavior, their corporate behavior, the political behavior of the Chinese government and state. So I think what I see most is this growing self-confidence as China, having opened the doors in 1978, having reformed the economy through the 80s and 90s, and then having 走出去 after that. And then 10 or 15 years after 走出去, there is a increasing level of maturity about China's understanding of the world. It's not perfect, but what I see is a greater, more mature reflection of what the world is like, and a greater sense of comfort in working in the world. Like in your job, you wouldn't be doing this in New York 20 years ago, would you?
True.
Okay, so you're an example of this.
But what do you think the confidence come from? Because for a long time, Western scholars always think that Chinese people regard themselves as a victim instead of very competent in the world stage.
I think...
is it because of economy or culture or something else?
Well, I think one of the good things about Chinese culture is you have this whole emphasis on 谦虚, modesty. And humility. This is not often the biggest strength in the United States. You know that, I know that, and hopefully the Americans won't hear this, so that'll be fine. But the great advantage that China has, I think there is an instinctive modesty about the culture and about behavior, and deferring to people. I think this is a good thing. Secondly, I think that is a good skill for understanding the world. If you go out into the world and your attitude is purely 100% 自大, that doesn't help understand the world. You just create enemies that way. And so I think learning to take your time and to patiently understand the world is a very fruitful exercise, although it takes time. The third thing is just a very practical thing, which is the doors were shut for a long time, and then they opened. And now tens of millions of Chinese have gone out into the world. Probably now hundreds of millions, I'm not sure, either short term or long term. So the world is less of a mystery to the people of China. And then, of course, there's the point that you referred to, which is that China is now wealthier. And as a country more powerful. The Chinese reformers of the late Qing dynasty dreamt of wealth and power. If you look at the traditional reformers of Yan Fu and Tan Tong and Liang Qichao, and that whole period, even Kang Youwei, in the 1890s, prior to the Xinhai Geming, they always dreamt of how China could obtain wealth and power to deal with the Yang Ren. So that was in the 1890s. 100 years later, wealth and power has arrived. And so I think Chinese people sense that, and that also enables them to be more confident in the world. Even though, as you know and I know, China still has stacks of problems. Chinese leadership knows that as well.
You travel to China a lot of times, and now you live in New York, so you know China, you know U.S. very well. In the past, we have a lot of people who work on the China-U.S. relationship very well, like Dr. Kissinger, like Mr. Paulson. What did you learn from their experience?
I think with Henry Kissinger, who I know very well, what Henry has concluded a long time ago is, first, a country as old as China does not change its fundamental views of the world quickly or easily. I mean, you've had a philosophical system and a system of language which is now, 4,000 years old, 3,000 to 4,000 years old. And so, as a result, you have a deeply entrenched view of the world and a view of yourself. There are no other countries like that. There are no other countries which are big modern countries which are simultaneously ancient countries. Perhaps Iran or Persia comes closest in terms of continuity. So that's the one thing which Henry emphasizes. I think the second thing is if you're going to try and help US-China relations, it's best to do it quietly. It's a very good principle. It's very easy in politics and in international relations to 说大话。说大话很容易，但是最困难的一件事就是解决好具体的问题，后来不说。That, I think, is a very clever approach from Henry. As for Hank, who I know as well, and so he has had a different perspective to Henry's, who has always been a foreign policy, national security guy. But what Hank has seen is the evolution of the Chinese entrepreneurial mind. And so he is constantly encouraged by what China has achieved in its economy. And so I listen to both of them a lot, and I'm privileged to count both of them as friends.
Just now you mentioned Paulson's difference from Dr. Kissinger. What's your difference from them two?
I'm an Australian. That's a pretty obvious difference. And I have no illusions about my importance in the world. At the end of the day, I am a former Prime Minister of one G20 country. These guys were respectively Secretary of State and Secretary of the Treasury for the largest country in the world. And so these guys carry a lot of influence. So I don't see myself in their league at all.
You once joke about Australians are good at bring the drinks. You provide a suggestion, go and get a drink. Just as you mentioned, China has a long history, and the US is the most powerful country in the world. So how do you make sure that your suggestions are more likely to be taken and more operational?
Well, at the end of the day, you can't guarantee that, because governments are governments. I have run my own government in the past, and governments ultimately make up their own minds. I think the key to successfully advising a government is to explain carefully your understanding of the interests of China and the interests of the United States. The interests of China as seen through Chinese eyes, but interestingly, the interests of China as seen through American eyes. And sometimes they're not the same thing. And by the same logic, it's important to explain to the Chinese American interests as the Americans see them. So I think half the battle is in removing this problem of perceptions. Some of them are objective difficulties, where it's not a problem of language and culture.
I agree with you that you are in a great place to talk to both sides in a way. But you're
Sometimes.
But you're not a Chinese, not America.
You can see it. 100%大鼻子，不算是中国人。
Have you ever come across a situation where you have like an outsider dilemma or like a trust crisis?
The outsider dilemma. Well, Australians generally have an outsider dilemma because we're the only Western country in Asia. And so we're kind of used to this outsider dilemma. Oh, there's New Zealand too. But as a result, we're used to being the odd man out or the odd man in, if you know what I mean. I think the key, there's one advantage in being an Australian in Asia relative to other Westerners. And that is, in our region, the Asia-Pacific region, we recognize the fact that there are much bigger, more powerful, and certainly more ancient cultures and civilizations than ours. Therefore, that places a burden of responsibility on us to understand these other cultures, to understand China from the inside, to understand Japan from the inside, as opposed to just thinking that these are expressions of Western thinking. The West is a relatively new idea, last 500 years. Most of these cultures and civilizations have been around for 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 plus. So as Australians, I can't say that we are naturally chin-shu, but we understand that we are new kids on the block, and we understand that we are smaller kids on the block. So therefore we make it our business to understand great powers, whether it's the Americans or you guys. So does that give us an advantage? Sometimes. Is that an outsider's dilemma? I think it's an outsider's advantage, actually.
Let's talk about individual case. For example, recently Donald Trump calls for China IP review, and we got the Chinese response. On this case, what do you think? What did you do? What are you going to do to help the two?
Well, the Trump presidency is unique. I haven't seen one like it. I don't think the American people have either, and probably not the Chinese people. Secondly, it's a deeply protectionist government. And they said that before they were elected. They're going to protect American industry against foreign firms, particularly Chinese firms. And since the election, they've done that. They announced the abolition of the TPP before they even started. And now they're beginning to take measures against China. So what can be done about it by people like us? The argument I always put is, never forget, all of us, how we have benefited from open trade and open investment rules. Asia, including China, 30 years ago, while not poor, was certainly not rich. The big thing that's changed it is the whole wealth that has come through open trade and investment between the countries of the region and between the region and the United States, between the region and Europe. So people often forget this, that in decades past, our part of the world was not all that prosperous. But it's prosperous now because of open lines of commerce and investment and trade and business and technology flows and capital flows. So that's the first thing we emphasize, which is, and the second thing we emphasize is, it's very easy to trigger a trade war, which becomes an investment war, which becomes an economic war. And once you do that, our collective wealth collapses. So what we try to do is just to emphasize these two basic truths in our dealings with the Chinese and with the Americans. Will we have an effect or not? I do not know. Because, as I said, this is a unique presidency.
So do you think protectionism or populism is only a short-term phenomenon or a beginning of a major, larger global trend?
My attitude is not one of making broad predictions, partly because I'm still, if you like, a political activist, which is I want to see changes in a positive direction. And so I believe it lies within the grasp of the Chinese government, the European governments, and the government of the United States to make the right decisions for the future, to keep economies open, to keep societies open, to keep markets open.
Tell me more about, your self-searching in Oxford, your life, your thinking, your mentality, how the change happened. Yeah.
How the change happened?
Yeah.
Well, I went to Oxford to do my PhD on military history. I was always very interested in the big questions of life.
Yeah.
What are we doing here, and what is the meaning of life, and what is the source of suffering in the world, and things like that. But I got the impression that you couldn't really engage with these questions in the academic world. The academic world is kind of pushing you to focus on more and more narrow and specialized questions on a parallel track I'm personally very engaged and interested in these big philosophical questions.
Big tension for you.
Yeah, when I got my tenure at the university, I felt that, okay, now I'm kind of secure, now they can't do anything to me. I'm some terrible crime, like you murder the dean or something, they can't touch you.
Yeah.
So I try and reconnect the two tracks with these big questions about humanity and about life. I guess it was luck had something to do with it, but it was very successful.
In the 20th century, there are some historians also ask big questions like Arnold Toynbee, H.G. Wells. How this kind of tradition shaped you? I mean,
Influenced me.
Yeah.
Well, the biggest influence on me, I think, was from Jared Diamond.
Jared Diamond.
He was a specialist in birds.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was the one who came and kind of showed the historians, look, you can do these things to, like, looking at humans from a bird's eye view.
From bird to bird view.
Yeah.
So you're comparing Jared Diamond. What's your advantage and disadvantage of your books?
Their strength compared with me is that I don't really have any background in biology. But if you just know biology, if you just understand evolution and you know everything there is to know about humans, you can now explain human history. I don't think that this can work because human history also has a very important ingredient of culture, of ideas, of stories, of fictions, and this is kind of my speciality, the exploration and understanding of fictions and mythologies and stories and their immense impact on human history. And if you don't give enough importance to the stories, to the fictions, you will never understand something like the Second World War, or like the French Revolution, or like the rise of Christianity. There was no biological or geographical explanation.
So what do you think the major flaw of your theory? Have you ever think about it?
Of my theory?
Yeah, your perspective. You try to explain the whole world, the history, but what's the major flaw in the process?
Well, if I knew the major flaw, I would have corrected it. But there are definitely flaws. I mean,
do you have any kind of worry? Maybe I speak so much about the change, the process, but actually I don't understand very well. Do you have any kind of concern?
There are many areas.
Because your tongue in the books is so confident. So,
yes.
Yeah.
There are many areas that I talk about and I have no first-hand experience. I just rely on what the experts in the field say and I believe them. And I have no ability to kind of verify for myself that what I'm saying is true. I just believe them. So it's only second-hand knowledge. I read articles and books about artificial intelligence and what are the principles behind the program, behind the machine learning. So I trust that they are right. I hope that they are not kind of, making this colossal mistake and leading the entire world after them.
赫拉利对多领域的探索，对二手知识的运用与宏大叙事的热情，让我想起另一位以色列朋友，他即将成为一位拉比，是位教授塔木德的老师。这部古老的典籍覆盖了犹太教的律法、习俗、祭祀、礼仪等。
You're gonna join me?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, welcome. Welcome, welcome, everybody.
Maybe say something about yourself. You're from Dutch?
Well, I am from a Dutch-German family, but I was born here. Nowadays, I'm studying to become a rabbi, conservative rabbi.
How could one be a rabbi?
You have to study and you have to pass exams.
You compare with the priest for the Christian, similar things or not similar? I mean, the role they played in the social society.
I think you are the spiritual leader. Of the people, and it's a very important job because you're working with people.
For us, for our outsider, the Jewish education seems very interesting combination. On the one side, it's a quite religious. You stick some everlasting truth. And the other side, the Jewish people seems very open to new technology, new knowledge. So how to explain the combination of this kind of paradox?
You know, if you read the Talmud, you can see in the Talmud that they already were very much open-minded. They had already broad knowledge. They didn't say, oh, we only have to confine ourselves to one knowledge, which is the Jewish. We have to understand everything because life is about everything. Talmud is a lot about discussions, open discussions. We bring different ideas and, oh, you heard a story that came from another country. How do we relate to that story? Is it relevant to us? I think that in the Jewish philosophy, and you have to listen to everything, understand other cultures, other people. 2,000 years ago, we were fighting amongst ourselves. And because we were fighting, you know, there were splits in the people, the temple was destroyed. So, you know, I think that the big issue of today is how do we build bridges? You know, how do we educate the next generation so we build bridges to people who are different than us?
And how the Jewish people deal with the trauma? I mean, teach the kids to know the trauma, to know their past.
We realized that the stories are very, very important. Everybody started talking about it and understanding that it is important to discuss it.
Do you think the Israel today still facing kind of existential crisis?
I want to believe that not. I think that, look, there are people in the world that say that they want us to disappear. But I don't think that, you know, practically it's possible. But human beings are not always predicted. What we learn from history is that human beings, that people, never learn from history. So history can often repeat itself because we just don't learn. So we don't look with open eyes of what happened only a few years ago and say, okay, let's do it differently. So I don't know. You know, I don't think that we are today on an immediate threat. But of course, Israelis feel that there is a threat. But I hope and I believe that we are strong enough and we'll be okay.
在以色列，宗教深入人们的生活，不同教派主张各异。
The fulfillment of my people's prayers for 2,000 years, 3 times a day. The Jewish
海雅是一位有着3个孩子的正统教犹太人。
Do you still feel lots of dangers everyday life, in everyday life?
You know, there was a time when there were a lot of car rammings going on in Jerusalem where terrorists would ram their cars into children. That was a scary time. I was, you know, my kids would go to school in the morning and I would literally cry with fear. That's not been happening in the past couple of years, so it's a quieter time right now. So I don't feel fear. I let my kids roam around freely.
From your point of view, how to, settle the huge conflict between Israel and Palestine is possible? I mean, during so long time.
Right. I think with the consciousness that we have today, it's not so possible. We need to be doing that work on ourselves personally and inside of ourselves. You know, I'm a therapist. I do couples workshops, you know, where it's about working on communication. So I think we need to be communicating more with our enemies and working through it via communication.
If the city is a patient,
Yeah.
how to describe the psychological problem or maybe mental disorder for the city?
You know, it's interesting we're having this interview today. Today is the National Day of Mourning. There's all sorts of things that we do today to enter into a consciousness of mourning for all of the pain of the world. 2,000 years ago, our people had senseless hatred. We hated for no good reason. We hated our brother, we hated our cousin, we hated. And for that, our national story goes, our temple was destroyed and the Jewish people were dispersed all over the world because we could not love each other. That's our psychological ailment is hate. And so the fixing of that is going to be love. it is love, senseless love. What does that mean, and how do we do that? is a whole other question. But I think just having that awareness, and we're trying to learn how to love senselessly.
Wow.
I know that seems like a little bit like theoretical, maybe. But I think it's true. I think that's where we have to start.
So in your book, you also mention about the global meaning crisis. Actually, people don't know who they are, and they lost identity. So how to cope with it, from your point of view? How to deal with the phenomenon? We can't come back. We can't go back.
We can't go back. This should be very clear.
Yeah,
the
we
road
must create
back.
new. Yeah, what's new? What's the new meaning?
I think that always the key is to get to know ourselves better. When people ask what is the meaning of life, they usually expect to be told some story about the universe, which gives them some role to play. You have the Jewish story, the Christian story, the national story, but all these stories are false because the universe doesn't work as a story. It exists today in the world, not Israel, not Japan, not Greece, not Egypt. None of them existed 5,000 years ago. Humans coming out of Africa, the first art, cave art, the farming, the invention of farming, of agriculture, the invention of writing, of money, the first cities, all these things happened long before any of the nations that today exist appeared. So none of them offers you an eternal truth. And I think that what the real answer to this search for meaning is leave all these stories aside. And the key thing is to really understand the reality about yourself. So there are many tools to do it, from meditation to the tools of science, that to really explore what is the body, what is the brain, what is happening within me. If you really know the truth about yourself, I don't think that you need any of these stories anymore.
So you say you must create your own story.
No, you don't create your own story. You search for the truth, about the reality about yourself.
But you said the whole history is about story, but how to see the reality. But people never live in the kind of true reality, mostly fictional.
Yes, as I said, in order to live in society, in order to have a functioning social order, you must have all these kinds of stories. They're useful as tools. You cannot build societies without a story in which people believe. But it's the same in the case of entire nations and religions. You can't organize millions of people together if they don't agree on some common story and common laws. So we need these things. But they are just tools. They are not the ultimate reality. If you mistake these imaginary stories for the ultimate reality, then you will never know the truth about yourself, and you will start usually sacrificing people for the sake of imaginary story, like what is happening in the Middle East all the times.
它算一种启蒙啊，让你想这些问题 AI 什么问题，但是大部分情况下大家不会真的想嘛，大家只是盲从某种新的说法而已，新的流行而已，它不是催促你更复杂性的思考，或者说要面对自己的很多问题，它更像是一种抚慰剂的方式。启蒙还是要很多自我发现的觉醒。
你看那个乌鸦在上面，下面卧虎藏龙，哇，好漂亮！
你从建筑形上显然它是有点博采众长，就有点和像他要把其他的宗教
大同是吧？
完全大同在这里。